So it's been about 10 years since a game called Undertale was dropped. It was a game that reached millions and people remember it so fondly. And it was a game that sparked memes, songs, and was even included in Smash Bros. Why do people not really talk about it anymore? And admittedly, it took me 10 years to actually try this game. So let's figure out exactly what I've been missing out on. Undertale was genuinely so bizarre. An indie game that honestly appeared out of nowhere, a game that became a classic in the indie genre, and now even has a sequel, being Deltarune. I'm honestly not sure if it may be a sequel, a spin-off, or maybe it's its whole new thing, but whatever. We're here to talk about Undertale. Honestly, I bet all the people watching this video you have either played the game already, you want a blast from the past, or maybe you just watched your favorite Let's Player play it. Or maybe you're like me, someone who never understood the Undertale craze, took one look at it and thought, yeah, this game really isn't for me. It was a game that reminded me of the first couple Final Fantasies and Dragon Quests, games that I was never particularly fond of, and never really found an appreciation for, up until recently. So I took it upon myself to really answer my own question. What made Undertale such a hit? What exactly did developer Toby do to make a game so special to the fanbase to be seen next to some of the most influential indie titles, like Five Nights at Freddy's, Hollow Knight, and Cuphead? Undertale had always been a game with many different interpretations. From searching on YouTube to even Reddit, nobody could really answer the question of what exactly the game was about. And it may be because the game never comes to a final verdict. It is a game that purposely avoids coming to a systematic ending. It's a game that throws so many different elements at the player and not waiting to see if they stick. Many could say it's a game about dealing with pain, a game about non-stop violence, or possibly it's a game about dating monsters. It's honestly a story that left me scratching my head all the way through, but for some reason, I loved every second of it. At the beginning, maybe the first 5 to 10 minutes of the story, it already takes you on a roller coaster of emotions. It constantly defies your expectations by throwing whole new concepts, unique to the average gamer. A flower that smiles at you turns out to be evil and absolutely berates you for avoiding attacks. A story about a war where the monsters lost, and humans managed to pull through. And a tall monster lady with horns turns out to be a loving mother-like figure to the player. These simple elements of the introduction keep the player on their toes, making the player expect the unexpected, as if they are being conditioned to not play this game like others they have played in the past. And that is exactly what Undertale tells you to do. Toriel, the lady from the intro, tells you not to kill the monsters who are actively trying to kill you. So hold on, wait a minute. A game, not only a game, but an RPG, where I'm not supposed to kill the disgusting looking monsters? It makes the player question, why the hell am I playing this game? This whole concept of making the player ask this question is a testament of what Undertale is trying to do. It is actively trying to break your immersion. It is actively trying to make you question the choices you are making. The tutorial is not a guide of how to play an RPG, but rather how to play Undertale. In the first decision we make, Toriel leaves us in a room by ourselves and tells us not to go anywhere. But the problem is, we can no longer progress if we decide to obey her, or rather just follow her simple instructions. This seemingly basic action tells the player that this game is filled with active decisions that you are responsible for. By constantly keeping the player on their toes, Undertale is allowed to throw puzzles at the player that aren't particularly challenging, but they serve as a way to stop the player from being completely immersed into the experience. It's like the entire time you play the game, you are aware it is still a video game. Unlike most games where you recognize a pattern, Undertale's enemies and puzzles always throw a wrench into your way of thinking. Unlike most games, enemies in this game are not really enemies, especially if you're following what Toriel told you to do, which is to spare your enemies. While you could kill every single monster you find, if you opt to spare your enemies, every single one is a different puzzle you have to crack, creating an entirely unique gameplay loop I don't believe any other game has managed to replicate. After passing the ruins and making your way back to reunite with Toriel, the game throws another wrench your way. Torio plans to lock you in her house forever, planning to never let the player leave and forcing us to sleep in a cozy bed along with eating freshly baked pies. How dare she? Torio even goes as far as to destroy the exit as we try to leave, because all the other kids she has kidnapped have left and ended up dying. Again, Undertale takes a pre-established video game norm and throws it all away. A tutorial character who wants to kidnap you, and then we have no choice but to fight her or be stuck forever? As we enter the battle with Toriel, she is more powerful than any other monster we have fought so far, but what the player also realizes is that you really can't lose. Toriel's nature as a caregiver stops her from being able to kill us. She goes as far as to even start avoiding us once we reach critical health. If you're like me, I was immediately stumped. The game up until this point never told us there would be enemies you couldn't beat passively. I tried to talk and spare Toriel as much as I could, but to no prevail. Determined to get the pacifist ending, I decided to fight her, to maybe play the game like Pokemon, where you can only do something once the enemy is low health. But to my surprise, my attack did so much damage it didn't even give me a chance to get her to lower health. After killing Toriel, the game knows the player is filled with guilt, and Undertale displays this knowledge all too well. If you're like me, I reloaded my save to try the battle again. Sparing her this time, you get a visit from Flowey. Unlike other games where you can always reload and try again, Undertale knows exactly what you have done. Flowey tells you exactly what you are, and doesn't let you walk away without reliving the guilt of knowing you manipulated the system. After being told that the world is a dangerous place and defying that warning, we enter a snowy forest, where, in a genuinely spine-chilling scene, a black figure is following us. Once it offers to shake our hand, we are greeted to the internet's greatest meme of all time. Luckily for the player, Sans is not a monster who wants to eat our faces off, but he's rather a chill guy. Introduced along with his brother Papyrus, a monster who wants to capture and kill you so he will gain recognition, the whole second section is centered around you and the two skeleton brothers. As you move along, you experience different trials Papyrus has set up for you. While these puzzles were put together by the great Papyrus, they end up being puzzles you'd find on the back of a kid's menu. Along with these scenes of chill guy Sans and idiot Papyrus, Undertale continues to make us wonder if playing as a pacifist is really worth it or not. In this second section, continuing through the game playing as a pacifist is really frustrating, and even time-consuming. Sparing enemies requires surviving a lot of attacks, and trial and error in selecting the correct choice for how to spare an enemy correctly. On the other hand, murdering these monsters creates a world where there are less monster encounters, and you have more health, and killing enemies becomes extremely easy. Undertale does a great job of making the player question if what they are doing is actually worth it or not, whether choosing the morally correct choice is worth your time and brain power, because wouldn't it be easier to murder every single person on sight? That question plagues your mind through the entirety of your playthrough. Along with this big overall question of whether murder is justified or not, Undertale also poses many smaller questions. Whether you like crosswords or word jumble, whether you want to buy some snow for $1 million, or whether you like chill guy Sans or the great Papyrus, Undertale asks you these questions as a sort of self-reflection. They give you the chance of voicing your opinion on choices that don't really matter, instead of giving you the option of staying quiet. Undertale pushes its underlying themes even harder by making its characters do some self-reflection as well. At the end of Papyrus's trials, he not only turns off his death machine that would have definitely murdered us, and instead becomes our friend, because he finally realizes that what he wanted wasn't our death, but rather approval of others and friendship, something that we as players can supply him. Moving past the interesting choice of taking Papyrus on a date, we enter Waterfall, the next section of the game. This section of the game boils down to the history of the monster-human war, the event we learned about in the prologue, and the new scary big bad, Undyne. But before we talk about Undyne, I want to talk about the war. Simply put, the war was completely unfair. we learn that a singular human soul is the same as all of the monster souls combined, meaning that the battle of the monsters versus humans wasn't really a fight, but rather a pub stomp. Not a singular human was killed in the battle, while countless monsters were murdered. This difference between humans and monsters highlights Undertale's main theme of, instead of being a game about attacking every monster we see, it's rather about understanding and responding to different stories. We as humans have beliefs based on the stories we have heard and experienced. Most of us, when we are faced with a different story than the one we have grown so attached to, often reject it immediately with hostility. That is what Undertale is trying to deliver, a message of while you do not have to openly accept all different points of view, but rather keep an open mind where you can recognize things can be different than what you believe. This point brings me to the big bad of this section, Undyne, a character with so much bloodlust that it seems like she cannot think of anything but having your head. Unlike all the other monsters you have encountered so far, she cannot be reasoned with. She is a character that even gets pissed off when you aren't proving her point that all humans are evil. She openly tries anything in her power to get you to fight her, which many probably did, accepting that she will never understand you, and in turn you will never understand her. The solution to beating her without proving her point is to run away from her until she passes out from exhaustion, giving the player a chance to disprove everything she has believed in and everything she has built her motives on top of. You are a person that is kind enough to offer water to a passed out monster, even if they were trying to kill you. After your battle, you have the opportunity to befriend Undyne, and despite her initial urge to murder you, it allows the player to understand exactly how stories can affect other people, how the stories of an absolute bloodbath can shape the motives of characters moving forward, teaching the player not to take everything at face value, analyzing every side, while also recognizing some sides can be wrong. As the halfway point of the story, Undertale finishes its setup of its theme, and how we people react to stories. It shifts into showing us the consequences of those reactions in the next parts of the game. We are introduced to the idea of how games along with stories can affect the people experiencing them. Then Undertale teaches us how these stories can better equip us when facing new and unique situations in our lives. And finally, we are taught how to react to differing points of view to better understand the outside world. Hotland is the next area in Undertale, and honestly could be a contender for one of the most interesting areas in the game. The scenes are incredibly interesting and bursting with personality, and the characters introduced are genuinely some of the most intriguing. Speaking of these characters, they are named Mettaton and Alphys. Alphys is a character that aims to possibly represent the audience Undertale aimed to capture, people who are described as nerds, people who play video games, lack confidence, but are somehow able to spew information they are passionate about endlessly. Unlike Alphys, Mettaton serves as a mirror to her character, with charisma and confidence, who also definitely wants to kill you. As you travel across Hotland, Mettaton sets up pieces that sort of mimic real-life television shows, which all have the end goal of murdering you. Luckily for you, Alphys always pulls through with a new invention to help you survive each encounter. After each scene with Mettaton, Alphys seems to open up to you talking about how she was insecure, but she talks to us and realizes her passions were her strengths and what actually made her stronger. Some people could see her as just another character like Papyrus, but honestly not quite. Alphys' story arc is much more complex than Papyrus. The long or the short of it, Alphys is a liar. It is revealed to us by Mettaton that Alphys had told him to act the part of a villain, so she could insert herself into our quest as an incredible hero. She is living a lie, just to feel better about herself. Both Mettaton and Alphys use stories in a way that we can deem unhealthy. Alphys uses them to hide from her past, trying to escape any possible memory from it, while Mettaton similarly tries to forget who he was before he became a robot. These mindsets can be directly compared to both Toriel and Sans. While different types of stories, both characters use jokes as a way to deal with their isolation, allowing them to become understanding individuals, which explains why they didn't kill you as soon as they met you. Much like Mettaton, Alphys, Undyne, and all the common monsters you meet have isolated themselves from differing perspectives. While humans have already forgotten about the war, the monsters use them to justify their actions, as they base most of their choices around it. After revealing that Alphys has lied once again, and instead of just needing a human soul to escape, we also need a monster soul, she also explains how we have to kill Asgore, the ruler of all monsters, or else he will have to kill us, throwing a wrench into our newly crafted pacifist lifestyle as we follow the silent road to the monster capital. We come across what seems to be Toriel's house, but as we explore, it is clear she is not here. And then we encounter more monsters. We begin to learn more about Asgore. Asgore did not shape his hatred for humans from an ignorant reason, such as anger or spite. He crafted his mentality of opposition to humans out of grief. Asgore is a person who lost all he truly loved to humans, but still wishes to do the right thing to protect the people he loves. Despite this respectable mentality, Asgore is still wrong. His mentality is isolating himself from new stories. He cannot forget the children he has lost to the hands of humans, but his grief blinds him from being able to use his better judgment to dictate whether humans are all the same. Undertale leaves the player with a choice. If you kill Asgore, it further establishes his beliefs, and monster kind will continue to be isolated from a world of different stories, but if you get killed by Asgore, it justifies all the worst stories in monster society, further establishing all the worst beliefs you have spent so long trying to fight. But no matter how you slice it, it's a lose-lose scenario, a choice that is no longer based around stories, but rather a simple choice of kill or be killed. Even before you meet Asgore in the Judgment Hall, you are judged by our good friend Sans, and he finally reveals his purpose. He is here to judge you on your level of violence and execution points. He explains how your level of violence depicts how open you are to a differing worldview, and understanding others. As you level up in this game, if you choose to kill the monsters, it becomes easier and easier, blinding you from the monsters' stories, making you an unstoppable force of nature. But if you keep that level at 0, then you are a person who is open to others. Someone who has the dedication, along with patience, to not take the easy way, but rather someone who learned to understand others. Unlike the open-minded person you have likely become at this point, Asgore has a closed mind. He surrounds himself with flowers that remind him of his children's death, and even keeps the bodies of the children he has murdered close by. Despite Asgore's kind personality, he's unable to understand a different point of view from his own. Like Flowey, he adopts the mentality of kill or be killed. He is unable to see a different outcome to your encounter, and as you enter the fight, it feels completely wrong. Asgore destroys the mercy button, and no matter how much you talk to him, there is nothing you can do. You are forced for possibly the first time to choose the fight option. As you survive the bullet hell Asgore throws at you, you whittle down Asgore to fatal health, and he begs you to kill him. The weight of his sins of murdering 6 children just to avenge 2 of his is eating away at him. His use of stories has turned monster society into a spiteful force that wishes to destroy humanity. Asgore teaches us that despite his understandable motives and beliefs, people can still make the wrong decisions. Some stories are so hard to swallow, but those stories are often the ones we need to give more attention to, because they are the ones that we can learn the most from. After healing his story, he gives us the choice of murdering him or sparing him, but then seemingly out of nowhere, Flowey shows up, kills Asgore, and forces you out of the game. Booting up the game again, we are greeted to a save file named Flowey. As we learn from the adorable little flower, Flowey has harnessed all 6 of the human souls, practically morphing him into this almighty being. The only thing preventing him from becoming God is the 7th and final human soul, which is yours. Flowey's boss fight being the final boss in the game can honestly be summed up in a singular word. It's just shallow, completely two-dimensional. There's no depth here. Using the power of friendship or something along those lines to beat him was honestly completely just a whatever climax. And genuinely, I think that's what Undertale was going for. When given the chance of whether to kill Flowey or spare him, choosing the former revives Flowey, and the next time we open the game, makes us fight him once again. But sparing him doesn't seem to be the correct answer either, as Flowey promises us to never change his ways, And as the credits roll, the player is filled with a sort of emptiness. We don't feel accomplished or satisfied. There's no happy ending here. Until Flowey shows up again, offering us a chance at a better ending. While this promise of a better ending sounds too good to be true, we now restart our save and begin what we now know as the true pacifist route. This route opens up lots of content that wasn't part of the previous playthrough. While I won't go too into depth, you end up getting a chance to meet up with familiar faces again until you're welcomed back into Hotland, where after some interesting and quite frankly uncomfortable scenes, you step foot into an elevator taking you into a whole new area that wasn't available before. This area serves as a place for you to find out more about Alphys and her battle within herself. The True Lab, as it is named, is a place that was created with the goal of experimenting and understanding determination, which apparently in this world is a trait that only humans can have, not monsters. The result of these experiments created disgusting, grotesque creatures called amalgamates. Amalgamates are creatures that were created by injecting determination into monsters. These creatures are exactly what Alphys has been bottling up deep inside. She is the person who created them, and she's the person who had to tell these monsters' families that their loved ones are now something truly disgusting. Amalgamates serve as a roadblock that we can only solve pacifist style. Unlike the other monsters that propose a choice, you are forced to remind these monsters who they used to be, creating a more somber tone to these battles that really weighs down on the player's mental state. As we move through the lab, we learn more and more about the backstory of this world. We learn about the first child, which ends up being the name we chose at the beginning of this game, and how Alphys is responsible for creating Flowey. As we are reunited with Alphys, she finally reaches the happy ending she deserves. She grew into someone who wasn't afraid to face her failures and learned to accept different stories to better herself as she grew. After completing this section, we are ready to reach the happy ending Flowey had promised us at the end of our first playthrough. As we enter the battle with Asgore, we are given hope as Toriel and the rest of our friends enter the scene, and it seems like we have finally reached the happy ending we wanted. But of course, it wouldn't be that easy. Flowey attacks everyone, collecting the souls of all the monsters we have grown to love, and reaches his final form, Asriel. Asriel is the culmination of what Undertale doesn't want you to become. A person who refuses to change. A person who refuses to listen. As you are unable to lose this fight, you are forced to understand Asriel's depressing worldview. A simplistic take on the world around you, an oversimplification of what stories are. Asriel tries to prove his point so much that he resets all of our friends to before we showed them our story. But like the first time, we are able to bring them back, as they have always been understanding people deep down. This brings us to what Undertale is actually about. Undertale aims for the player to understand that stories have the ability to change who we are, and it's important to be open to other stories, even if they may be wrong. We can learn and grow from others, but true growth comes from the willingness within. Undertale doesn't feel like other games where a message is crammed down your throat the whole way through. Rather, Undertale just wants you to walk away from this game as a better person than when you first started it. Undertale is an experience about learning about yourself and allowing yourself to grow because of it. Understanding who you are and how you and others react to different stories is exactly the message that Undertale wants to deliver. After being forced to look inwards and reflect on his actions, Asriel puts his shields down and becomes someone new, someone innocent. Monsters always had determination within them. Determination was the willingness to change who you are for the better of yourself and the people around you. We all have determination within us to create the best you we all know we can be. And this brings us to the end of the game. After being spit back out into the world of Undertale, the player is given a chance to revisit all the locations they have traveled through since we first arrived. The monsters, or now should I say friends, we have made along the way, are now happy and have found common ground with one another, understanding who they are and possessing an open mind. All of them, while different entities, all talk about moving past the underground, allowing the player to understand that there is more to do out in the real world, even though this story is coming to a close. As we end the game, we are shown the beautiful world above, and get to watch little scenes of what our favorite characters get up to after the credits roll. And honestly, after achieving this ending, Undertale was one of the most beautiful stories I have ever had the pleasure of completing. So let's finally answer the question, what is Undertale like 10 years later? It's a game that teaches us about ourselves better than most games out there, and is 1000% a story everyone should have the pleasure of experiencing firsthand. I genuinely hope you have taken away a new understanding from my retelling of this story, that was surprisingly created a decade ago. Thank you for taking the time to understand my story, and most of all, thank you for watching.